After a heated presidential debate as well as another attempted assassination on former President Donald Trump, we'll be taking a look at my updated 2024 presidential election prediction between these two candidates. Now, starting off here with Donald Trump's safe states, we're going to see a lot of these Great Plains states go to Donald Trump by a safe margin or above 12 points. Additionally, much of the southern United States will also go for Trump by safe margins. Now, that does give Donald Trump 125 safe electoral college votes. Now, for Kamala Harris, she will also have her own safe states here. That includes the West Coast as well as much of New England. Now, when you add all those electoral college votes up here for Kamala Harris, she will be at 181 electoral college votes. Now, going to Donald Trump and his likely states. First off, Donald Trump will carry the states of Iowa and Ohio by likely margins. This is not very surprising whatsoever. Both these states voted for Donald Trump by about 8% in the 2020 presidential election, despite the fact that polling suggested that these were razor-tight states. In fact, these were states that weren't really even that competitive. If you look at the state of Texas as well, this will probably not be a competitive state. It voted for Trump by 5.6%, and although Democrats have been making marginal gains in a lot of the suburban areas around Houston and Austin, if you look at the shifts, you will also see that Donald Trump did really well in the Rio Grande Valley, which is the Hispanic belt of the state, as well as a lot of the rural areas. It's going to be nearly impossible for Kamala Harris to flip a state as big and as rural as the state of Texas. So Texas is likely Republican. We go to the state of Florida here. This will also likely be a likely Republican state. This was a state that voted for Trump by a surprisingly large margin in 2020. Everyone expected this to be about a 1-point race. Some people expected Biden to win by 2 or 3%. As it turned out, Donald Trump easily carried the state of Florida, and Republicans have swept the state ever since. So Florida is indeed likely Republican. Finally, Maine 2nd District, a district that voted for Donald Trump in 2020 by 7%. It's a no-brainer that this will go for Donald Trump yet again by a likely margin. Now, of course, Kamala Harris will have her own likely Democratic states, starting off here with Colorado and New Mexico. Both those states voted for Joe Biden by double-digit margins in the 2020 presidential election, so it should be no surprise that both those states will vote for Kamala Harris again. Now, going to the next state here is going to be the state of Minnesota. Minnesota is not going to be that competitive because Kamala Harris's running mate, Tim Walz, is actually the governor in Minnesota. Now, he didn't actually do that well in his last election, winning by just around 8%, but nevertheless, there is sort of a running mate boost, and this is a state that has been trending more Democratic, at least in the suburbs, so it should be no surprise that Minnesota will also go to Kamala Harris by a likely margin. Next up, we go to the state of New Hampshire. I don't believe this will be that competitive of a state, simply because in 2020 this did vote for Biden by 7, and New England has been heavily trending towards Democrats, especially a state like New Hampshire, with a very significant white college-educated population that will be trending towards Democrats. Now, if you go to the next state on this list here, the state of Virginia, although polling has suggested a more competitive race, I personally believe that Kamala Harris will probably still end up winning the state. Now, obviously by less than the 10% margin that Biden carried the state by, where he did really well in some of the suburban areas. I think Kamala Harris compared to Biden will definitely flop in some of those regions, especially areas like Chesterfield County, Virginia Beach County, as well as Prince William and Loudoun counties. Nevertheless, this should not be a competitive state. After all, Virginia has again a very substantial college-educated white population, a group that has been moving away from Donald Trump, as well as a lot of suburban women where abortion is a big issue that should resonate with a lot of these more Democratic or liberal-leaning voters, and I do believe that Kamala Harris will still win the state by roughly 5%, so not the margin she would probably want, but she will still win the state. In all the safe states for Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, Harris collected 223 electoral college votes, while Donald Trump collected 219, which means that 96 are going to be lean or tilt for either side. I'm going to get the two small areas out of the way first, starting with Nebraska's 2nd Congressional District. This district actually voted for Joe Biden by about 6.6%, so I do believe that Kamala Harris will win it, though by about a much reduced margin of about 3 points. Next up, we go to the state of Maine. And if you want to understand the state of Maine and why this state that voted for Joe Biden by 9% is actually competitive, we have to go back to 2000, where again, if you look at the 2nd district, it voted for Gore by 1.9%. 2004, very solidly blue district. 2008, very solidly blue. 2012, very solidly blue. Then comes 2016, where this rural district here that is very Republican, as you can see, shifted 18% in a single 4-year term between 2012 and 2016. You have to see that the state of Maine itself is trending towards the Republican Party, and that was why Maine is still considered competitive, because Trump could really run up the numbers in the rural areas. However, the state is still probably going to go for Kamala Harris by roughly 3 to 4 points, or a lean margin. Now we go to the 7 states that truly matter. Now we go to the state of Nevada, the most sparsely populated of the 6 competitive states. First off, if you look at the state of Nevada, it's no secret that Clark County determines how the state will vote. Out of around the 1.4 million votes produced in the state back in 2020, 970,000 came from Clark County alone. That means Clark County is roughly 2/3 of the state's population. Now, this is also a county that has shifted towards the Republican Party in recent years thanks to its Hispanic population. Hispanic voters have been moving away from the Democratic Party over the past 8 years under President Donald Trump. And that is why the state is more competitive this time round. Now, if you look at polling, this is still a state that is expected to go for Harris by roughly 1.2%. However, it undermines the fact that 3 of the 4 polls conducted in the state has this race within a point, either towards Kamala Harris or towards Donald Trump. And it really shows that this is a very, very competitive state. Additionally, polls have consistently underestimated Trump in 2016 and 2020. And with all those factors considered, I do believe Nevada will go to the Republican Party by a tilt margin. That is the first flip on this map, but I don't think it's that significant because it's 6 electoral college votes, and most scenarios won't make or break a race. Nevertheless, this is still a flip for Donald Trump. And it's even more remarkable because of the fact that even Clinton in 2016, who actually lost the election to Donald Trump, 306 to 232, still won the state of Nevada. That certainly doesn't bode well for Democrats in the remaining states. Now going to the state of Arizona. Now, Arizona is a dynamic opposite of the state of Nevada. Essentially, there are 2 counties that are the kingmakers in the state, which are Maricopa County and Pima County. Maricopa County is roughly 60% of the state's population, if not around 62 to 63%, and Pima County is an additional 15% of the state's population. Now, those 2 counties combine for more than 3/4 of the entire electorate, and both of those counties shifted about 5% in favor of Joe Biden in the 2020 presidential election, which is how Donald Trump was able to win the state. Now, essentially, whoever wins the state is really reliant on Maricopa County. If the Democrats are able to win the county by more than 2.5%, they're almost guaranteed a victory. If a Republican is able to win the county or lose it by less than 1.2 to 1.3%, they're almost guaranteed to win the state of Arizona. Now, the problem here for Kamala Harris, in my opinion, is that a lot of moderate voters don't really like her because she's seen as someone who's more extreme and someone who's a flip-flopper, right? She previously said that immigration was a good thing. She previously supported Black Lives Matter. It looks like she doesn't support those positions as much or at all right now, and that doesn't look too good for her, especially in a state like Arizona, where there's a lot of moderate Republicans that are going to decide who wins the state. And right now in polling, Donald Trump maintains and enjoys a 1.3% advantage over Kamala Harris. His lead has actually widened a little bit compared to 2 or 3 weeks ago. So he's certainly in a solid position to win the state of Arizona, in my opinion. It just seems like that the 10,000 vote lead that Joe Biden had in the state in 2020 will not be enough to sustain Kamala Harris and win the state for her. So Arizona right now going to be another tilt state for Donald Trump, the second flip on this map. Currently in the swing states, Donald Trump is 2 for 2. Now at this point, Donald Trump is at 236 electoral college votes. That is more than what he got total in 2020, and we still have 5 swing states left to go. Starting off here with the state of Georgia. Now, in the state of Georgia here, this has been historically a very, very red state. Between 2000 and 2020, the 6 presidential elections in that time period, in 5 of the 6 elections, Georgia voted for the Republican candidate by more than 5%, with the only exception being 2020, when Joe Biden was able to flip the state. However, it does not look likely that the state will go for the Democratic Party once again. First off, Donald Trump is narrowly leading in the state of Georgia, at least in opinion polling, by race or thin margin, but he is leading. And in both 2020 and 2016, polling in the state overestimated Democratic support by roughly 1%. So if you do apply that trend, that doesn't look that promising here for for the Democratic Party. Additionally, there are several other things to consider. One problem for the Democratic Party in the state of Georgia is lacking voter enthusiasm. Democrats were able to win the state of Georgia because they had record high turnout in Atlanta and record numbers with white suburbanites. Now, Kamala Harris is not that appealing with white suburbanites, and some of these counties as well, especially Fulton County and DeKalb County, the two big Democratic centers of the state, there's a very high African American presence in those areas. And those voters, which are historically reluctant to turn out and vote, did turn out and vote in 2020 for Joe Biden. However, in this election cycle, it seems like a lot of those voters are turned off. And in a state that was decided by just 11,800 votes, that could be a huge problem. Just a few thousand voters not turning out could make a big difference, especially considering how close the state is in polling, which is not necessarily accurate, but still nevertheless an indicator. Right now, I have to say that the state of Georgia is leaning towards Donald Trump, something that many of these betting markets also agree with. Next up, going to the state of North Carolina, where Democrats have a major problem. The fact that Joe Biden actually lost the state to Donald Trump in 2020. It doesn't seem like any of the Trump voters who voted for him in 2020 will actually decide to not vote in 2024. However, there's a lot of Biden voters in 2020 who are saying that they might not vote for Kamala Harris. The fact that Democrats have already not won the state in 2020 could be a big issue. Additionally, polling almost consistently underestimates Republican support, at least Trump's support, in the state of North Carolina, and yet Donald Trump does still maintain the lead, albeit a pretty tight lead, over Kamala Harris, which definitely could be a problem for the Harris campaign. Although Harris has diverted a lot of funds in the state, it definitely does look unlikely that she will actually pull this one off, and as a result here North Carolina will be leaning Republican. Now finally we go to the three Rust Belt states, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, the three states that will decide who the next president of the United States will be. Starting off here with the state of Wisconsin. Now, in the state of Wisconsin here in the more recent polling, Kamala Harris does hold a 1.2% advantage over Donald Trump. The problem is the Wisconsin's historically inaccurate polling. In 2020, at this point in time, Biden led Donald Trump by 6.7%. In 2016, at this moment in time, Clinton led Trump by 4%. Clinton lost the state to Donald Trump in the actual election, and Biden won it by a fraction of 1%, showing roughly a 5 to 6% polling miss, rather extremely significant. Wisconsin polling has been heavily unreliable, and at least in Trump's cases, heavily underestimated Donald Trump, so we shouldn't take this polling number with much actual credit. Additionally, if you look at 2020, this was the closest of the three Rust Belt states and the reddest of them all. And there's a lot of these working class, these blue-collar voters who have relatively low incomes, who have definitely shifted away from the Democratic Party, who are eager to turn out in areas like Crawford County, Vernon County, Richland County, right? These are more working class areas that have heavily shifted towards the Republicans. Meanwhile, Democratic turnout does seem to be a bit depressed. If you look at some of these statistics, a lot of these Biden voters saying they're unsure whether they're actually going to turn out on Election Day. Those small things end up adding up, and it just doesn't look too promising for the Democratic Party in the state, especially because the state has a lot of white working class voters who actually shifted towards the right in 2020, despite the national environment being super unfavorable for Donald Trump. And just shows the fact that the state of Wisconsin will probably vote for the Republican Party and Donald Trump. Wisconsin is in the tilt Republican category. Now finally we go to the states of Michigan and Pennsylvania. First off, in the state of Michigan, current polling does have Kamala Harris up by 0.7%, but if you look at the historical error, that's not a very significant lead. If you look at the actual election results in 2020, you do see that Joe Biden did win the state by 155,000 votes, which does give Kamala Harris a type of buffer to say that she could lose a few voters and still win the state overall. Now, the fact that Joe Biden won the state kind of comes from these more suburban areas. For example, Oakland County shifted 6% towards Joe Biden in the 2020 election. Kent County shifted 9.2%, right? If you look at Livingstone, 6.8% shift towards Biden. These more suburban areas is what delivered the victory for the Democratic Party in the state of Michigan. And I do believe that Kamala Harris is a bit weaker in some of these areas, and that Trump will probably overrun his 2020 numbers in the rural areas. However, because Democrats do have a buffer, I do believe that Democrats are narrowly favored to win the state of Michigan by a fraction of 1 point, roughly 0.5%, or a tilt margin. Now going to the state of Pennsylvania. Now, if you look at Pennsylvania polling right now, it does suggest Trump has a narrow advantage. Pennsylvania polling is generally the most accurate out of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, but even in 2020, the state overestimated Joe Biden's support by roughly 4%, and in 2016, it overestimated Clinton's support by roughly 5%. So the polling here is still not very accurate. And if you look at the 2020 presidential election results, you see that Joe Biden did win the state by roughly 1.2%, so a slight buffer there for Kamala Harris. The problem is, though, that the Republican Party has been making major gains in some of these areas. For example, especially in the more working class areas, the more blue collar counties, right? Bucks County, Lehigh County, Northampton County, Monroe County, and Lackawanna, Luzerne County, as well as Erie County. These are the kind of big 7 counties where there have been a lot of white working class voters who have been shifting away from the Democratic Party. For example, Erie County was a county that Obama won by 15, right? Luzerne County was a county that Obama won by 10 in 2012. Both of those counties were really competitive. Erie County voted for Biden by a point, and Luzerne County actually voted for Trump by 14. Another good example, Lackawanna County. Biden was born in this county and only won here by 8%. In 2012, in a similar national environment, Obama actually carried this county by more than 20%. So you can see that big shift here between Obama and Biden, as well as especially Clinton, who only won this county by roughly 3%. And that is a really big problem here for the Democratic Party, that losing of the working class voters, which will only escalate with someone like Kamala Harris on the ballot, because a lot of these working class voters, they want this type of quote unquote generic president, this white male guy, as opposed to a African American / Indian female, and that's really gonna hurt someone like Kamala Harris. Another problem for Democrats is that in Philadelphia County, the county that produces the most Democratic voters of any county in the state of Pennsylvania, Democrats have been losing ground. In 2020, this county shifted 3.5%, or about 15,000 votes away from the Democratic Party, because there's a lot of working class voters in this county, and that's going to be a major problem for Democrats. This is their vote pocket in the state. And finally, in some of the more internal polls for Kamala Harris, for example, she did conduct an intern a few days ago in the state of Pennsylvania that actually shows her losing. According to her own campaign, the state of Pennsylvania is, quote, very difficult, but nonetheless doable. That does not sound to be a very super confident statement about the state of Pennsylvania, as well as their own chances. Even Kamala Harris believes that the state is probably not going to go for her, and that will be a big problem for her if she wants to win the state. Because even herself, she can't even convince herself that the state is actually going for her as of right now. So Pennsylvania does go in the tilt Republican column. Anyways, thank you for watching today's video. Be sure to like and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you for watching. Have a nice day. Goodbye.